So welcome to my presentation. I'm here to talk about project-based learning and real-world learning in the generative AI era. And I think that this is a really important topic because a few things. I think that traditional education as we know it is already being severely challenged by AI. I'm sure that you've been hearing a lot about this entire conference and you've been thinking about it. And so one of the solutions that I believe are the best is going to be that we have to shift our entire curricula from being content-based to be project and competency and skill-based. And so I have a lot to talk about this entire presentation, so we're going to actually start with an activity. In your opinion, what is something or a skill that AI can outperform you on? We got research, summarizing, data 검색, data analysis, fast information processing, finding resources and summarizing, yes. Paraphrasing, yes. For a lot of you who write papers, I'm sure it helps you to paraphrase things quite well. Coding, yes, particularly coding. Getting ideas. Okay, awesome. I'm going to move forward. I'm sure there's a lot more that people would like to participate on, but I just wanted to get your minds flowing a little bit in terms of what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you for participating. So, as we know, Gen AI can easily handle traditional educational tasks. If you take a test, a math test, a science test, a Korean language test even, an English language test, the Sunung, the SAT, any one of these, if you input it into ChatGPT, it will most likely outperform you. Now, it still does make some mistakes, so you do have a chance, maybe. Maybe instead of a 1600 on the SAT, it might get like a 1580. So you do have a chance, but I think the chances are getting slimmer and slimmer as these AI models become more and more robust. So I actually went on Reddit. I don't know if you know what Reddit is, but I'm from the Generation Y, aka known as just the millennials. And we like to use this social media app called Reddit. And I went to the teachers section of Reddit, subreddit. It's kind of like a SIG group. And I just took the entire thread about AI in education. It was a huge thread. I fed it into AI, into ChatGPT, and I asked it to produce me a word cloud, but get rid of like some of the most basic words like teacher or AI. And so with all that, some of the things that we can see here, and I know that for you, maybe it's not going to be the easiest to read. I'm going to say it so that you can see it maybe in these subtitles down here. Ethical dilemmas, right? We have detection is unreliable, automation, classroom tension, resistance, institutional lag, plagiarism, confusion, handwritten mandatory, GPA inflation, false positives, deception, creativity. So these are the opinions of people on this subreddit. I think the majority of them are teachers in the United States or English-speaking countries. And it's interesting how probably around 90% of the discourse here is very negative about AI, with a few things like creativity that shows up that could be positive, right? This is the state of AI in education, and I'm sure that a lot of you might feel the same things. I'm sure a lot of the teachers that are within the community also feel the same things. So I wanted to address some common beliefs and maybe debunk them a little bit. The first thing is that we oftentimes view AI as cheating. Surely you can. I have students who do it all the time. I'm sure you do too. The thing is, I remember when I first got my calculator. In America, we have this strong calculator called Texas Instruments, or I had the TI-89. I was given it in the 6th grade. And I remember when I got the calculator, there were teachers who were worried, like, oh, what if they just use the calculator to cheat? Which it certainly could. It couldn't even do calculus. It could do differentiation and integration. which I quickly figured out how to do. But I will tell you this, if I didn't have that calculator, I probably wouldn't have learned quite as fast. And I was able to grasp high school and college level concepts very quickly because I had the use of this tool. Now, in comparison, AI, I think, is a much more powerful calculator. And it works on different principles, right? It's not working on pure logic-based calculations. It actually uses Bayesian probabilities to create language. If you don't know what Bayesian is, you should look it up. It's about conditional probabilities. Now, AI is a much more powerful tool than a calculator, for sure. But at the same time, it's still a tool. And so for me, instead of cheating, AI is a huge opportunity for us to increase deeper learning. And I heard this at the ICOSE Learning Sciences conferences at Seoulde about a month ago. And one of the speakers talked about intelligence augmentation. And currently, you probably heard Microsoft laid off like 10,000 employees. Intel's laying off employees. Everyone's laying off employees. You know the ones that they're keeping? Most likely know how to use AI quite robustly and are able to augment their intelligence rapidly so that they have proven their value. And so it is imperative for us, I think, to train our own students. And if we are worried about cheating so much, what is the cost of not letting them use AI? Second part, AI undermines learning itself. But actually, I don't know if it does undermine learning. It undermines, I guess, maybe what we think is traditional accountability, right? We want to know that the student is doing the work, going through the cognitive processes to learn, to think, to create something, to generate something in their minds. What it does reveal is that rote memorization and content-based learning is limited, which is the majority of education in the world still. Finally, AI is going to replace teachers. It's funny, I consulted for multiple AI applications, and I apply the ICAP framework and also my other ideas about AI to help these app companies, a lot of engineers from Google, Amazon, and whatnot, and they kept trying to develop this AI coach that will be able to replace teachers. And it came clearer and clearer to me that it really can't do that well. Because yes, it could probably replace teachers who are not very good, but there is something really powerful about the role of a teacher in being able to intuitively understand their students, give the correct kinds of feedback. But I think one of the big shifts that needs to happen is that teachers can no longer be the center of knowledge. We can certainly try to be, but you know what? Your students are going to go way ahead of you, most likely. They're going to be looking up everything that you write about, and then they're going to think that they know even though they're not really sure. But I think that we need to now shift our focus to becoming facilitators and guides. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about computational thinking because it's very relevant to AI. For those who don't know computing education, which I am a part of, I'm dual appointed in the College of Education and also the College of Science and Mathematics. And I teach about computational thinking because I think these four things are core to how we can understand how AI works. Why? Because these are the four processes that AI utilizes the most. Pattern recognition, algorithmic logic, as in step-by-step type of instructions. It can be more complex with recursion, if some of you know about computer science. Basically, it's a program that kind of keeps on repeating itself into itself, right? Abstraction. Right. Abstraction is getting rid of unnecessary information, right? We ask ChatGPT to summarize, it gets rid of 95% of a text and gives you what it thinks is the most salient and the most important. Finally, decomposition, it's able to break things down. But let me tell you that these computational thinking skills are not limited to computers. This is actually human critical thinking. Because if you think about it, where does the idea of a computer come from? It came from us. It came from the way that we actually think. We are capable of doing these four things In some ways, maybe slightly better than computers still. But I think the major difference is that a computer can do this much faster than us, right? Much, much faster. But if I were to say that the human cognitive skills, is it limited to this? I would say no. This is a very small sliver of the skill sets that we have. We have so much more, and this is just a small part of human critical thinking. So then, my idea about generative AI era is that we should stop trying to battle AI on this, right? We shouldn't be the ones trying to do these mathematical kinds of calculations so rote and repetitively, because you know what? AI is going to outperform us on this, right? And I think that a lot of computer science education or STEM education or all education is trying to actually teach us these skill sets in one way or another. But what about all the other skill sets humans have? So I wanted us to think about what goes beyond computational thinking. Why? Because this is the space where we can still educate remarkably better than a computer can ever even attempt to. Complex intuitive decision making. Right, how many times have you fully thought about every single aspect of why you made every decision in your life? I want you to take a second. You probably will say that you probably didn't consider 90 to 95% of the things, but your brain intuitively is calculating those odds and probabilities, and you make decisions without having to think about everything. Computers can't do that. That's something that a skill set that we have. Ethical and moral judgments. Do you want computers to tell us what ethics and morals are? That's rhetorical. Probably not, right? Emotional intelligence, right? There was someone who asked ChatGPT recently, I saw this on a post, what the AI is most jealous of humans. And they said that we can understand emotions. Aesthetics, subjective meaning. What is beauty? What is good? What is a good design? Well, you can feed a bunch of Picasso, Rembrandt, you can feed a bunch of stuff to AI, and it can generate similar kinds of works, but it cannot have a capacity for whether that is aesthetically pleasing or not. It can only give you mimicry. And so I wanted to talk about 10 skill sets that I think go beyond computational thinking. There's a lot more. But I thought these 10 that I thought of were kind of important to discuss, especially in the context of Korea. Because I'm talking about project-based learning and real-world learning. And oftentimes when I hear discussions in Korea, people discuss about the project itself and the content of the project, but we don't talk about the most important part of the project in project-based learning, which is actually teaching these other skill sets. Just to give you context, in 2014, well, first of all, I taught in Korea from 2008 to around 2014. I was a SAT 강사 at Daechidong, right? And so I was quite good at what I did, and I was very good at test prep, and I was quite famous for being able to improve critical reading scores, which was very difficult to do. And then fast forward, I left Korea. I went to the United States and taught in some of the poorest neighborhoods. Mind you, that's a very stark contrast. I taught some of the richest kids in Korea. And I went to the poorest neighborhoods, and I helped build a school that worked on project-based learning. And let me tell you, it changed my life. The students' lives were changed too, but I'll tell you, I probably got so much more benefit than even they did. It's remarkable how much it changed me. And I think these 10 things, I was able to explore a lot more in this project-based learning school. And so I'll talk more about myself as we go along, but for now. So first skill set, we have creative and artistic expressions, right? Yes, it was funny, on Spotify, there's like a fake band. In America, there's a fake band that has like millions of views and followers now, or listens, and people were angry. But when I listened to it, I was quite bored by it. I actually, at a conference, there was one scholar who ended up trying to show the power of AI in creating human-like conversation, and it sounded real, like there was two people talking, like in a podcast, a female and a male. It's like, yeah, okay. And it's using like kind of human kinds of phrases. But you know what? I couldn't help but be so bored. Why? Because there's something about creative artistic expression and the ways in which we speak, the ways in which we emote, the ways in which we produce emotions that help us to, number one, attend, but also to learn and communicate. Second, we have complex emotional intelligence, right? Empathy, emotional support, regulating emotions. This is quite important. I actually spoke about this at the Busan 방송 for English speakers, where we're talking about the situation with the 3 students in Busan recently, and how emotional intelligence is so important. Third, intuition and instinct. I talked about this a little bit. Your gut feeling. How many times did you have a gut feeling that you felt something was true, and then you did something else because your brain was telling you something else, and then you go back like, I should have just listened to my gut. It was telling me something. Computers can't do that. We talked about ethical moral judgments, right? Again, I don't want computers to do that for me. Interpersonal communications, right? Persuasion, negotiation, influence. These are really difficult and powerful skills that we learn to hone and master. We also learn how to build trust and rapport. Cultural and contextual sensitivity. We're sitting here in Jeju with a bunch of Korean folks, and there's a particular culture to even here of educators. There's a particular identity to that. But when you go into your schools, you also have students who have diverse experiences, different interests. When you go to other places, we also have lots of different ethnicities, races. Right? How do we navigate all of that? Right? How do we do that? It's going to be quite difficult for computers to do this. It tries. But oftentimes, it can only do that well if we specify exactly what we're talking about. Humor and playfulness. I know that ChatGPT it's produced some decent humor lines, mostly based on past history, but doesn't really know for sure. It tries. And oftentimes it flops. But every once in a while, if you ask it to give you 100 jokes, a few of them might be really funny. So humor is one of the ways in which we tend to communicate. We have playfulness and social bonding, creativity, sarcasm, irony, subtle humor. Next, we have leadership skills and social influence. Right? How do you navigate complex group dynamics? There's a famous New York Times op-ed writer, opinion editor. His name is David Brooks, and he has this book called The Social Animal, which I believe is awesome, and just a plug, y'all should read it. He talks about how he noticed how there's some parents who don't send their kids to sleepovers. There's inherent risks to sleepovers, right? You're sending your child into someone else's home with different adults, right? There's a lot of different kids. But he argues that moment, denying that moment for children, is very, very detrimental, because it is in those social dynamics and those kinds of places where we learned how to develop these leadership skills, social influence, how to navigate complex human interactions. 9, adaptation to unpredictable scenarios. Right? Again, ChatGPT is about prediction. It can try to predict, but you know what? How can we create resilience for ourselves and our students? Finally, self-awareness and reflection. Metacognition, I think I want to highlight that, which is thinking about our thinking process. Have you ever asked your student, how did you get to this solution? What was your thinking process in this entire session? Right? Those are quite difficult types of questions to ask, and it teaches people how to think about their own thinking processes. And so, with those 10 skill sets, there's a lot more. I want to get into the easy part of this presentation, which is real-world learning. That's the easy part. Why? You don't have to do that much as an educator, as a system, because the hardest part is just making the connection with industry, right? How do we set up an apprenticeship program so that students can work in workplaces from youth? Which I think is going to be very relevant, because AI helps bridge the gap of skill sets and competencies, I believe. And so I think that real-world learning is going to accelerate even more, right? Yeah, so some examples, I'm going to give 3, I think. CareerWise Colorado. This program has students working directly with industry. They can earn high school and college credits and professional credentials, and they can immediately start work. The Kaufman Foundation. They have internships with local startups, corporations. Students launch real businesses, and they also get micro-credentials from like Amazon Web Services, Microsoft, Google. P-Tech Schools, which is IBM partnered. You can even earn an associate's degree, which is a 2-year college degree with a high school diploma. So they get a head start. They get mentorship from professionals at companies, and they get guaranteed job interviews and workplace experiences. These are all amazing. I'm not going to go that much deeper into this because there is so much to talk about in terms of project-based learning. But these are just some examples that you can try to follow along if you'd like to look them up. So let's get to the meat of this. What is project-based learning? When I first started teaching in this project-based learning school, nothing was developed. We had nothing. No curricula, nothing. I didn't even know what project-based learning was. And then we had this group of 9 teachers and staff and principals. It was small. We started with about 200 students, 9 staff, and we tried to figure it out together. And you're going to see some examples from this experience of things that happened. And I'll tell you, you learn project-based learning by doing project-based learning and figuring it out. That's the kind of cool part. You need to have some guidance in terms of people who understand the vision of what it does and how it's implemented. But the practice of it collaboratively is what iterations as in doing it over and over again, allows us to improve and build this capacity. And so the main 3 things is that it's interdisciplinary. I know here we're about convergence education. Projects span extended periods. We didn't have traditional 40-minute periods like in most American classes. Sometimes we did 3-hour periods, a whole day, right? And an authentic audience. So I'll talk about the core principles and then some add-ons. First is we want to have real-world assessment. As in, students can feel that what they're doing is real. How real is a geometry exam? How many of you here remember why a triangle is a triangle using geometric proofs? Side, angle, side, 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 angle, angle, angle. I'm sure most of you do not remember. How real was that for you? I'm sure that people who do architecture and engineering know this a bit better. And I hope they do, right? But it's very specific information. But does it feel real for most students? Probably not. Sustained inquiry. Inquiry is the process of figuring it out. It's just asking that why. Exploring, getting feedback, returning. Right? Inquiry, we think of as this huge concept, but it's really actually one of the most intuitive human capacities. If you find a 5 or 6-year-old child, actually I taught at a hagwon in Korea for a month for 5-year-olds and 8-year-olds once because my friend needed some help with that. And I remember I saw the 5-year-old and 6-year-old kids, and they were so inquisitive, and they naturally knew how to do inquiry. When I got to the 8-year-old students, the 3rd graders, they just go like, Sam, what are we doing today? No more inquiry. They're just asking to feed them, right? Give them exactly what they're supposed to know, right? 3rd principle is student volition, voice and choice. Students get to choose what they want to do, their pathways. Oftentimes when they're younger, they get quite a bit of choice, and then as they get into the middling age groups, they tend to have more restrictions in terms of creative restrictions. And then by college, I do project-based learning in college, I make it very, very, very loose, as in students can really choose whatever they want to do kind of a thing. And you'll see some videos I have. And 4th, collaboration. Team-based and co-generative collaboration. When I mean co-generative, it means that people are creating it together. It's not just you do part A, you do part B, you do part C, we just bring it together. No, I mean all group members are collaboratively deciding this is what we want. Sometimes they'll fight. That's okay. Conflict is actually good. In project-based learning, the first thing you learn is that conflict is inevitable, but it's also an opportunity for negotiation and persuasion and to learn from the process. And you could still have, let's say, this kind of a session, for example, but instead lessons become workshops, lessons with purpose, oftentimes with more hands-on kinds of activities. You'll see a couple videos of that later. Reflection and revision, right? We reflect, we improve, right? Public presentation. Oftentimes this has to go out to a real audience. Sometimes you'll see other examples, but we would send students out to do a presentation, or we bring community members in or parents in. Like even parent-teacher conferences, we didn't have parent-teacher conferences in our school. They were student-led conferences. The students led the discussion of what they were doing well and not doing well and how they like to improve. And then interdisciplinary. Most of the time it spanned every subject. Sometimes they might exclude one or two, but most of the time this was all in. Whenever we started a major project, we canceled all of our subject-based classes and we had just project. And the thing is, yeah, each teacher still had their specialty subjects that they were better skilled at, like I did mathematics and sciences. Some people are better at social studies, right? But then those teachers would then be able to mentor those aspects of the projects more, right? So when I talk interdisciplinary, for example, sustainability can be environmental studies, cost-profit analysis, a creative campaign, policy, and communication, right? This can all be integrated within a project that's on sustainability. Just a quick, I guess, breakdown of what one project topic could be. So these are some other principles that I'm adding on. They're not necessarily core to project-based learning, but I think they are. First one is social emotional learning. We talked about this. Those 10 skill sets include a lot of this, right? Communication, empathy, conflict resolution, metacognition. And the question is, how can we get students to explicitly work on these skills? It's not easy. We'll answer that a little bit later. The second PJBL, project-based learning plus principle, I think is mastery-based learning because it's just so inherently involved, which is giving time and the flexibility for students to revise and iterate. Soft internal deadlines, meaning that you might have all these deadlines, but they're flexible. Just like in a workplace. Obviously, if there's a product launch, it's a hard deadline at the end, but what happens in the middle can shift depending on what happens. And then the question is, what is seat time? If a student sits in a class in college for 3 credit hours, did they actually learn 3 credit hours worth? Can you know? Does the time tell you on your transcript that the student learned this subject? No, it can't. But what we can say is if that you're graded based on mastery of skill sets and competencies, well, then maybe you can say, well, this teacher claims that this student was able to master this kind of competency. I would have a lot more encouragement from that than a teacher just saying they got a B-. What does a B- mean? What if they just never showed up to class, got 100 on tests, but got a B-? I actually used to do that too. Competency-based assessments, right? Instead of A, B, C, 100, 90, 85, whatever those mean, we want students to be able to practice competencies such as reading analytically, practicing social responsibility, writing persuasively, understanding yourself, your own identity, right? These are competencies. So here in my school, and it's kind of grainy, sorry, these pictures were taken many, many years ago, and the megapixels weren't very high. But this is our competency ceremony. It's called the attainment ceremony, in which students nominate each other, they give speeches, and they talk about the skill sets that they've developed over the years, over 4 years. And at the end, we would give them a hoodie, right? We would give them something, and they would feel like part of a community. And as you can see, this was intentionally set up as everyone facing each other, right? This is not just a forward-facing ceremony. We're all part of a community, right? The students on the back side behind them were people who are already awarded this competency ceremony award, right? And the ones behind are often younger students or sometimes older students who are kind of later to the game, but it's okay. We're all here in it together. And finally, I think this is the last one, is design-based thinking. I don't know if you know a lot about this, but design-based thinking is core and concept to a lot of, I guess, the two schools of thought from it come from Stanford. They have a D school or D branding where they do design. And then there's IDEO, IDEO. It's a company that pretty much takes on any project and designs solutions for people. It's quite famous in the States. And it's a 6-step or 7-step process. I kind of consolidate some of them. But the first thing is to empathize and to understand the needs and pain points of people. Because what's the point of making a solution if it doesn't matter, if I won't use it? We make products all the time that people don't use or purchase. Maybe they need to start with empathizing. What do people need, right? And then define the problem, ideate solution, prototype, reflect, iterate. I'm not going to go into this, but if you want to invite me back, I could talk about some of the other topics more in depth. There's a lot to talk about, unpack from here. So I'm going to show you a second video. This is actually, I'm teaching a course right now in Seoulde. It's called Foundations of Learning Sciences, and it's also project-based learning. And this is going to be an example of one workshop. This is a design-based thinking workshop that I did where I just posed one question to students, and I gave them 2 hours to figure it out. I said, I hear that a lot of you have had trouble navigating the Seoulde campus because we had a lot of foreigners, but even some Korean students had trouble. Some of them came late to class. So actually, I noticed because I was like, all these students, they came late the first day. Some of them came, if they entered the class later, they came late. So I was like, okay, maybe we should figure out a solution for this because it seems to be a problem. So then I asked them to figure it out. And they engaged in design-based thinking, and this is one solution.
When we first arrived at Seoul National University, we point out the map like Naver or Kakao often given driving directions for route guidance. So if we are walking to the building, we end up taking a much longer detour. And that because there are so many buildings in Seoul National University of similar building numbers, so it's hard to identify specific building numbers. We felt this problem was caused by the map's failure to present enough information and sufficient information in an intuitive way. So we set out to solve this problem.
So we did brainstorm 16 solutions and ended up choosing the one that the guys are going to talk about. But I feel like it's important to talk a little bit why we didn't end up choosing others. While they were very effective in their own respective ways, the ones that were the most time and cost efficient for implementation ended up solving very small portions of the issue that we have with not having enough information about how to get somewhere efficiently. So, for example, we had an idea about recording video instructions for every course, how to get to the classroom from the nearest important sites, like the nearest bus stop or stuff. But that doesn't solve the issue of getting to other administrative and recreational buildings on campus. Or, for example, we were thinking of improving the system of signposts, but it's also limited because there is just so much infrastructure on campus that we can't put everything on the signpost. And so, hence, we ended up with a solution that was actually inspired by the system that already exists in Korea. And we feel like it's the best that we can get for now.
Let me share an idea inspired by something we often see on Korean highways. So in Korea, many highways are painted with colored lanes. So these colors play an important role. They help drivers easily understand where to go without getting confused. So we thought.
I'm going to pause here. This is where they empathize with the fact that they're in Korea, right? Because if they make this signage and change something at Seoul, the most of the people who are going to use it are actually probably Korean people, right? So that's something to think about.
This could be a great idea to apply at SNU as well. And so we came up with a simple but effective solution that what if we used colored paths on campus to help people find buildings more easily? As you can see in the illustration, each path could be painted in a different color depending on the destination, making navigation much clearer and much intuitive for everyone on campus.
So I'm going to stop the video there just for time's sake. There's more to it. This actually happened last week, so I was able to get all these subtitles in. Thank you, ChatGPT. But hopefully you can see the value of when you ask students to do something, right? They're navigating complex tasks, and they're learning to they negotiate it, obviously, right? And they're able to really think about how a solution might actually work. And that's actually one of the skill sets that I teach my students, because I believe that's one of the foundations of learning sciences that I do teach about. So I'm going to take you through a project that we worked on at my school. This is called Starting Up. We had 10th graders create their own startup companies. One of them I know actually went through with this. She is now, how old is she? Oh my gosh, 25 years old. And because of this project and another selective or an elective that she took with me about food business, she has her own thriving Instagram food business where she bakes really amazing cakes and teaches people how to do it. And she has her own, factory kind of area, and people come and pick it up from her. And she paid her way through college. She didn't need to go to college. She makes enough money already, but she finished college because she wanted to, and she has a thriving business, and she comes from one of the poorest neighborhoods in the United States. Just giving you that. Okay, so step one, how do we design for project-based learning? Well, first we start with an essential question, such as, how can we reduce food waste in our community? The main part of this is that students should understand why they should do this. When you give a math worksheet, what is the why that you tell students? Because you have to learn it, or because you have to do well in the suneung. That's the only way to get the Samsung, or right? Those are the kinds of whys, right? But real whys are things that strike us emotionally, right? These are problems I see that I want to be able to fix, right? The true anger emotion, right? In society, we use anger in many ways to protect our other emotions, like disappointment or other things that we're feeling. But true anger is actually indignance. It's the anger that comes from seeing injustice. That is definitely a strong why for students. That could be one. Or you know what? Another why can be, I really want to make something. I really want to explore what I'm interested in and do something that I want to, right? So then this is where I talk about culturally and responsive and sustaining pedagogies. I can do a whole workshop on just this. So you can always invite me back for this if you want to. Just a plug. But the big part of culturally responsive sustaining pedagogies, right? Gloria Latson Billings, Geneva Gay, Django Paris, right? Do you understand the culture and identity of your students? How do students see themselves in the work at hand, and how do they relate to what they're working on? Right? Responsive pedagogies, how can we empower students? Empower meaning, do they have actual influence in their communities, in their own lives? Do we give students that power in classrooms? I wonder. Are students critically examining real-world issues and designing solutions? How will students' learning lead to meaningful action? So then step two, once we have this down, that's already hard. Doing this is already very difficult. It's a very difficult start. But once we get past that, and let me tell you this, it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes we had projects that were not that good because, as teachers, we think like, oh, students will love this. And they're like, no, we hated it. But that's actually feedback for us we actually redesigned a lot of projects, and we'll talk about it at the end. So step 2, clearly define desired outcomes. What should students learn? What should students demonstrate? And what kind of social emotional learning skills can we explicitly put into these projects? So here's an example of one of our projects, essential questions and competencies we call attainments in our school, such as I can use math to handle finances effectively. That's different than just being I'm good at math, right? It's a very specific competency. I can create models for a situation, right? We do that all the time, not just in mathematics. We do that in pretty much every field. But this is a specific competency, and it's transdisciplinary skill, as in it goes through interdisciplines. I can summarize and represent and interpret data. And then finally, the social emotional one here is I can plan and organize myself, time and work in ways that support and improve whatever I am focused on. So we had this thing called the GRASPs, which tells us basically why are you doing this and what are you doing? Right? We had this goal for our students. You've been granted an opportunity to start a business of your dreams. You're all entrepreneurs, and our audience are investors, venture capitalists. The world is ready for the next best business idea. You've been chosen to present a business concept, but you need to have a market analysis, a budget, a business plan, a pitch. Right? These are real things that people need to do if they want to present on, let's say, the TV show Shark Tank. I don't know if you've ever seen that. I wonder if Korea has an equivalent. Step 3, connect multiple disciplines. We map out essential questions. For science, for this project starting up, it depended on the topic. But math was business and finance. Social studies was policies, ethics, context. Language arts included business proposal and pitches, which are different discourses, right? And then for arts, we had branding and marketing. Step 4, then you have to scaffold sustained inquiry. We need to break it down. Why? Especially for students, it's really complex. Even for adults, it's really complex, especially for students. So then we usually have a hook or an entry. We have like a game, or we create a scenario, or we do something where students get involved into whatever this project will feel like. Then we have them do research and exploration. We do workshops. We then have them develop and prototype things. We have peers review each other, and we have presentations. Right? This is just one example, but we call them tasks. Here's task 1, background research. Here's an example of this project starting up. We had them look up what is an entrepreneur, what are well-known entrepreneurs, and then we had them go specifically into what they're interested in. And actually some of the responses that you're going to see in here is someone is a student, a group of students who are interested in opening their own daycare because they felt they needed one in their community. Task 2, we had them do market analysis. So they had a market analysis packet. They needed to see, well, how many daycares are there in this neighborhood? Why do you need this? Do you think that you'd be able to get enough customers? Right? We had them do strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats analysis, which is very common in business. Then we had them make a budget. Here's a sample budget. I know it's a little hard to read, but this is the daycare. They had workers' salaries, dry erase boards, interior design, renovations, right? A lot of different things. And obviously this is not perfect, right? This is just a model. But to have students already start thinking about how they can do this, well, I told you already, there's a student who I know for sure who has utilized these skill sets and probably vastly improved upon this to build their own business. They looked up revenue streams and profit projections. They created cost and profit functions from algebra. Right, as you can see down here, C of x equals 191,160x, right? And there was a lot more math behind it, but they had to show how they got to that. Then we had students build a business proposal. They had some examples of some, but they were able to build their own. So then step 5, part of the project-based learning, is to maximize student ownership. We need to provide multiple pathways for student decisions. They get to choose the topics. They have autonomy in forming groups and roles. They should be able to select the product and format, the mode. Here, they had a pitch, but a pitch can look remarkably different. Some pitches were skits. Some pitches were a pitch deck and presentation. We had students do it different ways. We had some pitches that involved students building artwork, right? We had some build brochures, right? Different modes. Let students choose the way they want to do it. Some of them made some TikTok videos, or back then Snapchat videos, right? Step 6, create meaningful assessments. Define clearly how you will assess those competencies with rubrics. And you'll see an example of that in a second. And our culminating task was this, the pitch. And so this is an example of rubric. This is zoomed in for a bit, but I actually had a huge hand in building most of these, but it's not easy to build these. Building a rubric is very dope. But let me tell you, I wish I had ChatGPT back then, because I could build this probably 10 times faster. Building this one rubric probably took like 5 to 10 hours, and in iterations, we had to kind of improve it over and over as we used it. That was for handling finances. Step 7, explicitly plan in social and emotional learning practices. Team building exercises, reflective journals, regular check-ins. In our school, before we started any class session, I would check in with all the students. How's your day? Sometimes students would tell me some ghastly things that happened to them right before they came to school. Sometimes they're happy and elated. Well, you know what? Allowing students to express their emotions, number one, you as a teacher gain that information to help you to better assess how to work with that student, but sometimes expressing emotions helps to alleviate some of the difficult parts of it. And sometimes expressing good emotions can help influence others to feel better, right? So that was an important part of our school process. Here's Attainment 64 we talked about, right? I can manage my time in order to do what needs to be done. I'm on time for class. I get things done on time. I can come to class prepared. I have and use strategies to start and finish an assignment or project on time. And if you go to the 4, which is like the top score, on the bottom right says like, I can use a personalized organizational system that helps me to prioritize and tackle assignments and projects in a timely manner, such as a planner, Google Calendar, right? Whatever works for the students, right? And we didn't determine for them what works for them. We want students to tell us what works for them and what they're using. Or maybe it didn't work for them. How can they change or do something better next time? Here's 66. We actually had 66 competencies or attainments, we call it. I can reflect on my thoughts, right? And make decisions that are based on my observations and insights, right? Knowing your own story, that's E. Openness to feedback, articulate how I'm improving, right? These are things that we try to find ways to measure. And we would give students grades based on their presentation to us. And they had to always make the argument of why they deserve what they did. And sometimes students would say, you know, I think I only deserve a 3 on this part. You know, most students would probably say 4, but no, they were honest about it sometimes. They're like, you know what, I don't think I'm at the 4 yet, but that's okay. We had students work on these competencies for 4 years to try to move up the scale. Some students started really good on some things, some students not so good. But all of our students were expected to be able to attain all 66 attainments by the time they graduated. Step 8, how to design for project-based learning? Well, now we have to connect it to authentic audience, involving external stakeholders such as community members, parents, local businesses, organizations, industry mentors, field experts, politicians. We actually got in politicians for one project. Scholars, we got professors to come in and to evaluate student work, right? You know, we would try to make it feel as real as possible. And then we will culminate in a public exhibition. Right, arrange a formal public presentation or showcase. Students should present to as authentic audience as possible. We're trying to make it as real as possible, if not real. And in this place, we can also celebrate students' efforts and recognize their mastery. Finally, we need to reflect on our learning outcomes. Debrief. What worked, what didn't work? And you know what? Not just with teachers, with students, staff, everyone. And we all change it together. Here's an example. This was after one of our projects. As you see in the front, we have 2 students here. And in our crowd, we don't have just teachers. We have the principal, guidance counselors, social workers, the school secretary, right? We had everyone there. And actually, there were other students on the back who actually joined these groups, and we collectively thought about how the project went, and we collectively redesigned parts of projects. And so that's also the design-based thinking aspect of doing this. And when you do project-based learning as an educator, you yourself learn about project-based learning, right? As long as you follow some of these principles, if you don't follow all of them, that's okay. You know what? We didn't even do all these 10 steps from the start. We probably had like 6 of them. But as we went along, we realized, oh, this could be improved, that can be improved. And it's not easy, because it requires an administration and union protection. Actually, I was the union chapter leader, to be able to create a school that allows for this. And so this is my presentation. Thank you so much.